The morning sun rose lazily over the small village of Seroweir, its golden rays spilling over the thatched rooftops and dusty pathways. Birds chirped in the distance, a melody of life continuing as it always had. But inside one small mud-brick house, time had come to a standstill. Naledi sat motionless on the edge of her bed, staring at the bundle of clothes in her hands. They still smelled like him. Her son, Thato. The boy she had carried for 9 months, raised with trembling hands, and watched grow into a man. The boy who was now gone. Her throat burned, but no tears came. She had cried too much already. 3 days ago, Thato had left home, full of excitement. "Mama, I got the job," he had said, his face beaming with the kind of joy that made a mother's heart swell with pride. "Are you sure, my boy?" she had asked, hiding the doubt in her voice. "Gaborone is a big city. It is not like here." Thato had only laughed, pulling her into a warm embrace. "Mama, it'll be fine. I'll work hard, save money, and soon you won't have to sell vegetables in the market anymore." She had smiled then, even as something inside her trembled. A mother's heart always knows. The call had come 2 nights later. A stranger's voice on the other end, hesitant and filled with pity. There had been an accident. A speeding car. A young man crossing the road. A life cut too short. Naledi had dropped the phone. The world had blurred. The sound of her own wailing had filled the room, raw and unbearable. Neighbors had come running, whispering in hushed voices, holding her as she shook. Now, she sat in silence, clutching the last pieces of him. His old school shirt. His favorite cap. The tiny blanket he had loved as a child. Outside, the village continued with its life. Goats bleated. Women gossiped at the borehole. The world moved on, as it always did. But inside that small house, a mother sat alone, drowning in the silence of a loss too deep to heal. And for the first time in her life, Naledi did not know how to breathe. The afternoon before the accident, Thato had been walking through the crowded streets of Gaborone, his heart light with excitement. His first day at work had gone well, his supervisor had even praised him for his eagerness. He could already see the future he had promised his mother taking shape. As he reached his rented room, his phone rang. It was his aunt Masego. "My child, I hear you are now a big man in the city," she said, her voice too sweet, too smooth. Thato smiled, leaning against the door. "Yes, aunt. I started today." There was a pause, a silence that made his stomach tighten. Then she chuckled softly. "You have done well. But be careful, my boy. The city swallows the proud." Her words sat heavily on him long after the call ended. Something about them unsettled him, but he brushed the feeling away. He was just tired. Far away in Sero, Masego sat alone in her darkened hut, a single candle flickering in front of her. Her wrinkled hands trembled slightly as she picked up a small wooden doll, carefully wrapped in a piece of Thato's old t-shirt, stolen from Naledi's washing line weeks before. She placed the doll before her, muttering under her breath. "You think you will succeed? That you will be better than my own son? No, dear child, you will not rise above me." She dipped a thin needle into a blackened calabash filled with strange herbs and thick, red liquid. Then, with a wicked gleam in her eyes, drove the needle into the doll's tiny chest. At that very moment, in Gaborone, Thato gasped, clutching his heart. A sudden tightness gripped his chest. He shook his head, blinking rapidly. What was that? The pain passed as quickly as it had come. He took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. Maybe it was just exhaustion. But Masego wasn't done. She took a second needle and traced a path down the doll's legs. "You will not run from your fate." She stabbed it into the feet. That night, as Thato walked home from work, his body felt unusually heavy. His legs dragged, his head swam. The streetlights blurred into long, stretching shadows. The sound of screeching tires filled the air. A sharp, blinding light. A flash of pain. Then, darkness. Back in Sero. Masego felt the moment his soul left his body. A shudder passed through her, a gust of cold air sweeping through the hut. She smiled grimly, tucking the doll away. "It is done." She poured a handful of ash into the candle flame, snuffing it out. The room plunged into silence. But as she stood up, a sharp knock rattled her door. Masego froze. A second knock, louder this time. Her heart pounded. She turned slowly, but the door creaked open on its own. A cold wind rushed in, carrying a whisper. "Aunt Masego." "Why?" Her knees buckled. Thato's voice. Masego's breath caught in her throat. The air in the hut turned thick, heavy, pressing down on her like an unseen force. She clutched her chest, stumbling back, her old bones trembling. "Who is there?" she croaked, though she already knew the answer. The candle had gone out, but the room was not in complete darkness. A faint, eerie glow flickered in the doorway. A shadow stood there, shifting, almost human, but not quite. Then, she heard it again. "Mangwain. Why did you do this to me?" Thato's voice was barely above a whisper, yet it filled the room, echoing from every corner. Masego squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head violently. "No. No, this is not real," she muttered. But when she opened them again, the shadow had moved closer, and this time, she saw him. Thato stood before her, his face pale, his clothes torn and blooded from the accident. His once bright eyes were hollow, filled with a sadness that burned through her like fire. "I trusted you," he said. Masego staggered, gripping the edge of a wooden stool for support. Sweat dripped down her face. She had called upon dark forces before, but never had she felt this kind of presence, a spirit unbroken by death, demanding answers. "It was not supposed to be this way," she blurted out, her voice frantic. "You were too proud. You thought you could rise above your family, above me. I only wanted to teach you humility." Thato's expression did not change. He took a step closer. The room grew colder. The flame in the hearth flickered wildly before dying out completely. "You took my life. For what?" Masego's lips quivered. "You don't understand, Thato. Your mother, Naledi, she always looked down on me. She had everything. A son who loved her, a son who provided. While my own son, useless, drunk, a failure, what did I have? Nothing. I only wanted to balance things. I only wanted justice." Thato's ghost shook his head. "You did not seek justice, aunt, you sought destruction." A deep groan filled the hut as the walls creaked. The shadows twisted and swirled around Masego. Fear gripped her heart as her knees buckled, sending her crashing to the floor. The whispers started then, low at first, then growing louder. Voices, many voices, swarming around her. "Murderer. Thato's blood is on your hands. You will never know peace." Masego clamped her hands over her ears, wailing, "No. Leave me alone." But Thato only watched, his form flickering like a dying flame. "You will pay, aunt, just as you cursed me, so shall you be cursed. Your nights will never be quiet. Your dreams will never be free. You will hear my footsteps, feel my presence, until the day you join me in the darkness." The walls of the hut shuddered. The wind howled. The door slammed shut on its own. And then, silence. Thato was gone. But Masego knew. She was no longer alone. The spirits would never leave her. She had brought this upon herself. The night after Thato's ghost visited her, Masego did not sleep. She sat huddled in the corner of her hut, rocking back and forth, her ears filled with whispers only she could hear. Shadows moved where they should not, cold fingers brushed against her skin, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, his blooded face, his hollow eyes, his accusing stare. By dawn, she knew she had to act. She gathered her shawl, her walking stick, and a small pouch filled with offerings. There were others, those who knew how to deal with spirits, those with greater power. She would find them. Her first stop was at the home of Mammoths, an old woman known for her dealings with the unseen. Her hut sat on the outskirts of the village, surrounded by dried herbs, animal bones, and strange carvings in the sand. "You have come with a heavy spirit," Mermutsa said the moment Masego stepped inside. She did not even look up from grinding her herbs. Masego knelt before her, hands trembling. "I need your help. A spirit torments me. He will not leave me be." Mermutsa finally looked up, her sharp eyes studying Masego. Then she took a handful of white powder and blew it into the air. The room filled with an eerie stillness. Then, she gasped. Masego. What have you done? Masego's lips trembled. I only wanted to teach him a lesson. I did not mean for him to die. Mermitsa stood abruptly, stepping away as if Masego carried a plague. You have called upon darkness and spilled innocent blood. This is beyond me. Please, Mermitsa. There must be a way. No. The old woman snapped. The dead do not forget. There is no herb, no sacrifice, no spell that can undo what you have done. The air grew thick again, and a cold wind swept through the hut. He is here. Momotsi's voice was barely above a whisper. Masego let out a small, broken sob. She ran. She ran to Mokgosi, a witch doctor known for his dealings with dark spirits. A price must be paid, he told her. You must find a sacrifice, another soul in place of his. Masego recoiled. No. I cannot kill another. Mokgosi shrugged. Then suffer. There is no escape. One by one, the witches turned her away. None would touch her case. None dared face Thato's spirit. By the 7th day, Masego could take it no more. The whispers had become screams. Shadows danced along her walls, and at night, she felt unseen hands pressing against her throat, suffocating her. She could not eat. Could not sleep. Could not breathe. Her body grew weak, her mind unsteady. And so, she did the only thing left. She confessed. Under the scorching afternoon sun, she walked into Naledi's yard, her feet dragging, her face gaunt and hollowed by torment. Villagers gathered, their eyes wide with shock. Naledi emerged from her house, confusion lining her face. Masego fell to her knees. Naledi. Forgive me. It was me. I did it. I cursed Thato. Gasps filled the air. Naledi's breath hitched. What? What are you saying? Tears streamed down Masego's face. I was jealous. I wanted him to fail. I went to the spirits, and I cursed him. I did not mean to kill him. But now. He will not let me rest. A wail of grief tore from Naledi's throat. The villagers murmured, rage burning in their eyes. Some stepped forward, ready to strike Masego, but Naledi raised a hand, stopping them. No, she said, her voice thick with pain. She will suffer as I have suffered. And suffer, she did. That night, Masego returned to her hut, her body weak, her mind shattered. The whispers were louder now. Murderer. 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 Thato stood in the corner, watching her, silent, waiting. Masego collapsed onto her mat, clutching her head, begging for mercy. But there was none. As dawn broke over Cerro, her hut remained silent. The villagers found her there, her body cold, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth frozen in a final, silent scream. Masego was dead. But even in death, her soul did not rest. For the spirits had claimed her, just as Thato had promised.